From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Kari Lake loses the Arizona governor's race in what could be a Republican state wipeout as a federal appeals court rules against President Biden's student loan forgiveness plan. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues Kim Strassel and Alicia Finley. Welcome to you both. In what could be the most telling election result of the 2022 cycle, Kari Lake, the former TV news anchor and Stop the Steal enthusiast, has lost the gubernatorial election in Arizona officially now. News organizations made that call last night. The latest figure, they're moving as these final ballots get counted, but the latest figures show State Secretary of State Katie Hobbs with 50.4% of the vote to Kari Lake's 49.6%. And notable that the recount threshold in Arizona is a half a percentage point. So as of now, this is out of recount territory. And Kim, what do you make of this? I think this is a fascinating result in that I think that Kari Lake might have been Donald Trump's best pick, most compelling and well-spoken candidate this year.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's why this race went down to the wire instead of her being blown out like so many other candidates that he had given his seal of approval to. And yet, when you look at the underlying results, it turns out she lost for many of the same reasons that everybody else lost, in that she lost independents by 7 points, moderates by 20 points. She even lost 9% of her own Republican Party members. And it seems to me there's no way to escape that this comes back to a lot of the statements she had made about the election in 2020 being a fraud, something that she continued to repeat until the end. We know from exit polls that a lot of voters were tired of hearing about this and unwilling to trust Republicans in office that were still harping on this. This is kind of the message of the election. There are other things too. There's abortion, a question of whether or not Republican candidates ran on a positive enough agenda rather than simply trashing on the Biden administration and Democrats. But there is no escaping. This was part of the mood of the country, and another one bites the dust, as it were.
Well, let me dilate for a minute on that 9% figure that Kim cited. This is from the National Exit Poll. And the National Exit Polls, those numbers can also move a little bit as they re-weight the data based on the final election results. But this shows that in Arizona, 9% of self-identified Republican voters told the exit pollsters that they had voted for the Democrat, Katie Hobbs. And just for comparison's sake, Republican defections in the same exit poll were 3%. In Florida, that's where Governor Ron DeSantis won a really strong reelection. Republican defections were 2% in Georgia. That's where Governor Brian Kemp won a very strong reelection. And they were worse than Kari Lake in Pennsylvania. So if you look at the Pennsylvania gubernatorial race, this exit poll sorted by party ID, 83% of Republicans voted for Doug Mastriano, the Republican candidate, and 16% voted for the Democratic candidate, Shapiro, the Attorney General. And Alicia, I think these are really striking figures because if 9% of Republicans in Arizona voted for the Democratic gubernatorial candidate, I wonder what share of Republicans voted for Kari Lake, but were sort of holding their nose to do it because they are fed up with this stolen election talk. I think there's been a remarkable break in recent days. And let's listen to, we have a clip of the current Republican Attorney General of Arizona, that's Mark Brnovich, speaking about these theories to 60 Minutes last month.
We as prosecutors deal in facts and evidence, and I'm not like the clowns that throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks.
Clowns.
Clowns. Did I say that? Yes, I think that there were a lot of clowns out there that they saw what they wanted to see. What is that Simon Garfunkel line that a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest? There was a lot of that going on.
It's going on in the top Arizona races, where the Republican for governor is a denier.
We had a fraudulent election, a corrupt election, and we have an illegitimate president sitting in the White House.
It's like a giant grift in some ways.
A grift, a swindle, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Alicia, I think this is a fascinating result again because I wonder how many Republican candidates who are eyeing races in 2024 are going to take the lesson from Arizona that talking about a stolen election in 2020 might get you the nomination, but it will not win you the election in November.
Well, I think that's right. One other fascinating data point is that Doug Ducey in 2018 won independents by 7 percentage points, whereas Kari Lake lost by 7, the exact same share. In this last election, actually, independents, for whatever reason, made up a much larger share of the electorate, at least according to the exit polls, than they did in 2018. And one question is if that's because Arizona in general is becoming less red, and during the Trump years that maybe some voters who were Republicans decided, well, I'm not going to be a member of this party, and actually switched and dropped their party affiliation. Or it could just be because of the influx of newcomers. Arizona is one of those states like Florida, which has experienced a huge influx of migrants, and we're not talking about Hispanics or, Mexicans coming from across the border, just people from other states. And as a result, it's becoming actually a little more purplish, and we've seen that during the Trump years. And so maybe the increase in the independent vote this election may be a result of that. But for whatever reason, they obviously didn't like what she was saying, and then they disagreed with her. And so to your point, yes, maybe she was able to win the primary based on these claims, but the Republican share of the electorate was much smaller this year than it was in 2018. And you won't be able to win a general election based on these claims. And to your first point about holding their noses, I think that's right. I think there were a lot of even Republicans and some independents who generally agree with the Republican policies, just like they did with Trump policies. They favor lower taxes, school choice. They want to continue the Doug Ducey legacy. And they voted for her because of that, and perhaps hoping that, well, her election fraud claims were just purely cynical way of, winning the primary and perhaps drawing more celebrity to herself. And that was the reason and the only reason that they voted for her. But again, that did not carry the day and carry the election.
But the same dynamic seems to have taken place for all of the big races at the top of the ballot. So the Senate candidate Blake Masters, he opened his Republican primary campaign saying he thought Trump won in 2020. After he captured the GOP nomination, then he tried to pivot, and he blamed big tech and blamed changing the rules while saying that he didn't see any evidence that the vote totals were wrong or fraudulent. He has lost to Senator Mark Kelly, rounding here about 47% to 51%. The Secretary of State Republican candidate Mark Fincham was a strong Stop the Steal theorist. He's lost about 48% to 52%. And then the Attorney General's race, the Republican candidate there is Abraham Hamadeh. He was, again, a Trump-endorsed candidate, promised a day of reckoning for people who worked to rob President Trump in the rigged 2020 election. And this one is the closest, Kim. Mr. Hamadeh is currently down by about 0.2 of a percentage point. And so as they count these final ballots, that could get closer. He could end up pulling it out. We could go to a recount. That seems probable at this point. But notable, at the bottom of the ballot, you have a Republican state treasurer, Kimberly Yee, who won re-election with about 56% of the vote to 44, so more than 10 points. And so, Kim, I guess that would cut against the argument that Arizona is just no longer a red state, because my guess is that people don't have a lot of deep thoughts about the state treasurer's election, about the management of Arizona's state investments. I read that as sort of a proxy for generic Republican support.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that. And also other results in the state back that up as well, too. Look, we're currently trying to get to a final number in the House of Representatives. The GOP is very close as we're recording this. It has 217 seats. It needs 218. And one of the reasons that it has inched closer is because, in fact, Republican David Schweikert, incumbent, did manage to hold on to a seat that was decided just yesterday. Also, Juan Ciscomani, a Republican challenger, managed to flip a seat in Arizona. Very important for Republicans and their potential to have some control. If you look at the state legislature as well, too, Republicans had owned the Senate. They've already come back out essentially with the exact same numbers they had going into the race. The House of Representatives, which Republicans were controlling, they're still doing a number of counting, but right now Republicans are ahead. It looks likely that they may well hold on to that as well, too. So, yeah, if you aren't a high profile figure who is making a lot of these claims that are sucking up all the media attention, and Republican voters, if they feel you've done a good job, you're going to get reelected. In Arizona, I don't think the general dynamic of that has changed. I would like just to point out, though, we're talking about what this means in terms of candidates, but I think it's worth pointing out this is like a terrible loss, not that the dynamics in terms of voters, but in terms of the potential harm to policies. Alicia was mentioning that Doug Ducey had been reelected by 14 points. One of the reasons he wasn't, one of his biggest legacies there was this extraordinary school choice that had been implemented in Arizona. You could arguably make the case that that state is further ahead than any other state in the country in offering options for parents to exercise some control over their children's education. And yet the new governor who lost to Kari Lake, this is the consequences of losing, was Katie Hobbs. And this Democrat, Katie Hobbs, she not only ran a very uninspiring campaign, but this is a person who is all in the teachers union and ran against this. And while she may not be able to force wholesale change, given that Republicans will likely control at least one, if not both, the chambers of the state legislature, there's a lot that she can do from an executive perspective that could really undermine these programs. And this is not just a question of themes and how do you win. There are real consequences to not choosing quality candidates who can get across the finish line.